I'm here with Congressman Robert Wexler to talk about the current status of online poker. First of all, you got to say shuffle up and deal this morning. How was that?
Very exciting. It was for someone who is a big fan of poker. It's what doesn't get any better than that.
Awesome. All right, let's get right to it. You are the lead sponsor of H.R. 2610, the Skill Games Protection Act, which exempts games of skill such as poker from being applied at the UIGEA. Now, what's the current status?
The current status is that the Republican Congress, the last Congress, passed a horrible law. They attached it to a port security bill that in effect prevents adult Americans, law-abiding Americans, from playing America's pastime, poker, on the internet. And I and others think that was a wrong thing to do. It violates our civil liberties, our civil rights. A game such as poker that literally is enjoyed in kitchens across the country has been played in the White House, in the Senate, in the House, in the Supreme Court for decades. All of a sudden, the Republicans effectively come along and say, nope, in the medium of the 21st century, the internet, we're not going to allow law-abiding adults to choose to play what games they wish to play. So what we did was, and I sponsored the law, was to say that with respect to a game of skill, which poker is, as compared to a game of chance where you play against the house. But poker, you're playing against other poker players. What we're saying is, with appropriate regulation to make sure that minors, children, do not play, with appropriate regulation, and this is one of the beauties of the internet, you can tell if people are playing that have addictions, gambling addictions, or whatever it may be. You can get them the help and assistance they need. But we ought to allow that type of action, behavior, by adults in America in the 21st century. The result, what we have now, is actually totally counterproductive, because you have now an unregulated internet coming from outside the United States. And that's a silly result. Also, as a result of the United States passing the law and implementing it the way it has, the Congress, the United States is in violation of our World Trade Organization treaties. Europe and other countries have sued and made claims against the United States because the Justice Department winds up trying to enforce these regulations against foreign companies, and it just doesn't work. So we're trying, through my bill, to undo that very ill-thought-through legislation.
I spoke with you last year. How much ground has been made in the last year?
I think we've made a lot of ground in terms of educating members of Congress, in terms of the absurd ramifications of what we did. We had a recent vote at the House Financial Services Committee to try to prevent the regulations from going into effect. And we lost on a tie vote, 32-32, which may not sound so terrific. However, that was the best vote we had in the entire history of the Congress on such an issue.
It seemed like a setback, but Howard Letter said the same thing, that at least members of Congress and people are starting to understand. Now, what was the argument against it?
Well, poker is not a partisan issue. Democrats love to play poker. Republicans love to play poker. Independents love to play poker. But what happened at this committee is the Republicans, by and large, although a very pro-positive amendment was offered by Peter King of New York, a Republican, most of the Republicans voted against their own fellow Republicans' amendment. And they did so because they made a really, what I think is not credible argument, and they said that they put it in the context of gambling and ethics and morality. No. What we're talking about here is whether or not banks and financial institutions should be required to create a definition of gambling that the Justice Department hasn't even created yet, and go and enforce it. No. What we need to do is prevent these governmental infringements upon Americans' personal liberties. And I think when you put it in that context, most Americans shake their head to say, listen, Congress and the federal government, we've got a gasoline crisis. We have a war in Iraq that we need to get settled. We've got a war in Afghanistan we haven't won yet. Americans need help with their jobs. Americans need help with their health care. Americans need a new energy policy. college kids in our country don't have the funds to go to college, and Congress is concerned about preventing people from playing poker on the internet. That's what we're asking our banks to do. It's just a bizarre set of priorities. We're going to go back to the financial services, hopefully get a better vote next time, and that will be the beginning, I hope, of a policy of sanity when it comes to allowing adults in America to choose to play the games that they wish on the internet.
What kind of timeline is there for getting back and trying to get another vote?
Sooner the better. The Congress goes on a extended break for August, so we would hope to have an opportunity before that in July. That would be for the short-term goal of preventing the regulations. And then we have a longer-term goal, which is to undo the entire act itself as it relates to poker and possibly other games. And that's a longer-term goal that if it doesn't happen in this Congress, hopefully it can happen with the new president.
I might be biased because, of course, as a poker player, this all makes sense. This argument makes sense. And for the other side, I've heard these somewhat, to me, it feels like outlandish arguments saying that these underage kids are going to empty their whole family's bank account. So when you come to them with this argument that seems to make so much sense about taxing and regulating, how can they argue that?
Well, people can argue a lot of things in politics that are outlandish, like you say, and that bear no resemblance to the facts. The irony is the people oftentimes that are making the argument you're talking about are people that are supportive of horse track racing on the internet, people who are supportive of having lotteries on the internet, all of which are betting games where it's not a game of skill, and where, ironically, the bettor has a far worse chance of winning than they do in a poker game. The bottom line is the beauty of what I and others have proposed is that not only do we protect people's civil liberties and their right to play the game they wish to play on the internet, but we also prevent against abuse by minors being able to gamble, by people with addictions being able to get their assistance. That's the greatness of the internet. You can actually create the programming so you can ferret out those kinds of abuses. Where we stand today is those abuses stand because you can gamble on the internet. You'll just be using a company from another country that doesn't care one hoot about preventing minors from gambling. Our bill requires that. So that's where I think it lacks credibility, the arguments that you're talking about.
So gambling, if it's going to be happening, it'd almost be better to be happening online so that way it can be tracked and those who need help can be helped.
Well, my bill says that games of skill, like poker, shouldn't be prevented from being played on the internet. And it allows people to exercise their freedoms, and it also prevents against things such as minors or people with addictions from engaging in a way that would be destructive.
So where do we go from here? The PPA is doing so well, over 1 million members, and we keep telling our viewers to write your congressman. Are there any other things that we supporters can do?
Well, you're right. The Poker Players Alliance has done an extraordinary job. They're taking the fight to Washington, and they are making the arguments extremely well. They're educating members of Congress. And each person should not minimize their ability to influence this process. Members of Congress take notice when it comes to issues like this where citizens really weigh in. The good news is, of course, it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a common sense, I would argue, apple pie and motherhood issue. This is poker. This is America's pastime. So I would ask respectfully for people to engage in the political process, contact their representatives, their senators, tell them how they feel about poker and playing poker on the internet. And I think if people continue to do this, we'll have the momentum to do what's right.
Are there any upcoming initiatives that players can attend?
In Congress, we're going to seek another revote on preventing the regulations, and then the broader votes on undoing the bad bills to begin on.
Congressman, I hear you have a book coming out. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I do. The title is Fire Breathing Liberal, and I talk about the need for liberals to take our country back And one of the examples that I provide in terms of our country going so far over the edge in terms of violating people's civil liberties is the whole issue of poker. And I talk about my campaign in the book, Fire Breathing Liberal, to undo the historic injustice that the previous Republican Congress foisted on the American people. And I think this poker issue is symbolic in many ways of what's wrong with Washington. We've got to protect Americans from terrorism. We've got to, in my view, get our troops out of Iraq responsibly. We've got to start up our economy that's in a doldrum. We've got to help people get college educations. They're having a hard time getting college loans. We've got to have an energy policy that brings relief to people when they pump up their cars with gasoline. And we're regulating poker? And we're preventing law-abiding adults from playing poker? This is the kind of insanity that I talk about in my book, Fire Breathing Liberal, and try to bring people to a call of action to take our country back.
It sounds like it's talking about the biggest concern of everybody in the United States. Where can people find this book?
They can go to bookstores. They can go online, Amazon.com. I think it's pretty well distributed, but online's always great, and the local bookstore is good too.
Thank you so much for stopping by.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Christy Arnett with Congressman Robert Wexler for Card Player TV.